They said my voice would serve the Emperor. They didn't tell me it would never stop screaming. The day the black ship found our hive, the sky came down in sheets of ash so thick they turned the sun into a bruise. Ecclesiarchy banners shook themselves awake along the gantries, and the hab masses thrummed with a rumor that felt like prayer trying to become fear. The Veritas Solis did not land. It hovered above the spires like a judgment that had learned patience. Its grav wake pressed the smoke flat and made the vox masts sing. I was at my tally station, counting promethium drums by the light of a lumen that buzzed like an insect trapped in glass. Numbers had always calmed me. They behaved when people didn't. Then the broadcast cut through the hive like a blade through cloth, no words, just a tone that made the air taste of copper. Doors unlocked by decree. Sirens took the place of birds we did not have. Even the lift cages seemed to move more quickly, as if the hive itself wished to be clean. They called us to the processional square. Priests in soot-white vestments burned incense thick enough to sting tears into loyal eyes. Arbites formed a ring of black around the crowd, visors down, mauls idle against greaves. Mothers lifted babies to the light, as if to prove nothing hid in their skulls. I kept my hands folded, because they shook when I opened them. A confessor recited the litany of separation. We chorused the amens like a shore answering tide. Then the sisters came, null-helmed, golden-faced, their steps making silence out of sound. I felt my thoughts shrink away from them, not from fear, not from shame, but the way a candle dwindles before a window opened to night. One paused near me. The air around her was a place without echoes. "Designation?" an administratum scribe asked, quill waiting above a slate. "Kalen," I began, then corrected myself. "Citizen Kalen Thas Taliman, Promethium Subledger 9. "Not for long," he said, and scratched a new line where my name had been. The slate chimed a tone that sounded pleased with itself. They tested us with relic needles and prayer wires. They smelled our breath for the copper of dreams. When they touched me, the needles sang. The confessor smiled, and the sisters did not. I remember my mother pushing through the press, her shawl full of ash, her eyes bright with the terrible courage of the devout. She pressed her rosary into my palm, wood beads oiled by years, aquila worn soft by worry. "Sing loudly," she said, "so he hears you." I nodded because it was easier than explaining that my voice had always been loudest when I tried not to use it. They shackled us in pairs, wrists to wrists, ankles to rails. Across the coupling from me, a young woman drew a breath like she was about to drown and decided against it. She had the kind of stillness that makes rooms forget to breathe. Her hair was bound in a simple knot. A scrap of burnt blue ribbon clung to it as if for a mentory. "Dear life." "Seren Vale," she said when the scribe flicked his eyes toward her. "Threadcutter, Hab Tower 6, Stair 9. The quill hesitated, then wrote her smaller than me. That seemed wrong. Even then, she felt larger than the square. A gag went between my teeth, bitter with disinfectant and older fear. The chain tugged. We moved. Seren matched my step without looking. Her shoulder touched mine once, lightly, and the silence around the sisters spread like frost. The lift cage swallowed us. The higher we rose, the thinner the air felt. The hive's great vents exhaled in weary gusts. Incense braided itself into the metal smell until both seemed the same. From above, the processional square looked orderly. From inside it, it had been a mouth that learned to close. The docking umbilical kissed the Veritas Solis with a sound like the seal of a confession breaking. Her corridors were narrow and kind to neither echo nor plea. Pilgrim candles guttered in niches along the bulkheads, their wax pooling like the remains of small, stubborn hopes. Every door had a prayer etched into its lintel in a dozen hands and none. We passed a shrine where a machine spirit slept behind a grill of brass feathers. A sister paused, lay 2 fingers on the metal, and the hum within it changed, as if listening was a form of command. They sat us on the great work of a hold large enough to house a cathedral's bones. Rows of Psykers, children with 2 old eyes, old men with newborn mouths, women like Seren whose faces had learned stillness in a hurry. Gags bit down. Null collars closed with a chime I felt more than heard. The hum began not from engines, not from pipes, but from us, the way 1,000 throats can sing without sound when the thing that moves them isn't air. Seren's shoulder touched mine again. She turned her head just enough that the ribbon shadowed her cheek. "Do you pray?" she mouthed. The gag made words an exercise in faith. I moved my tongue against it and shaped the yes she wanted. She nodded and, with the tiniest movement of bound wrists, tapped 3 times on the deck in the cadence of the litany of endurance. I answered 4, 10. We had a language. The hold lights dimmed to the color of dried blood. Somewhere in the ship, a bell tolled once. The sound walked away down metal corridors and did not return. A deck serf smeared unguents along our collars and murmured the same sentence to each of us in turn. Sanction preserves, service purifies. He did not look at our faces while he said it. Perhaps that too was a kind of mercy. When the ship's clamps released, the gravity did a small, apologetic violence to our stomachs, and the Veritas Solis remembered what it was, a vessel that ate distance to bring offerings home. The hive fell away. The stars rose like nails hammered into a black door. Across the chain, Seren watched them without blinking. The ribbon in her hair did not move. Her fingers tapped the deck. Once, twice, steady, brave, an argument against silence. I pressed my mother's rosary inside my fist until the Aquila found my lifeline and hurt. The beads clicked. The sound was small, human, and guilty of being heard. A sister's visor turned toward us. The silence she wore reached out and covered the noise like a hand over a mouth. My thoughts shivered under her gaze and learned how to hold still. They said my voice would serve the Emperor. As the hum rose and rose, and the ship's prayers woke in the walls, I began to understand how service sounds when it stops being yours. The first days inside the Veritas Solis were measured by the sound of our own breathing. There were no clocks, no sense of hours, only the low vibration that ran through the hull like a pulse that belonged to something larger than the ship. It wasn't the thrum of engines. It was alive in a way that machines shouldn't be. We were kept in darkness most of the time, the kind that eats distance. The air was thick with a medicinal sweetness that clung to the tongue. Somewhere, far beyond the walls, you could hear the shuffle of boots and the slow whisper of filtered air. When the sisters passed, that whisper would vanish, and the hum would tighten, as if even the ship's metal remembered to kneel. Seren sat across from me, chains linking our wrists to the same bar. She never spoke, but her presence anchored me. I learned her language through the smallest movements, a flex of fingers, a tilt of her head, the deliberate rhythm of her breath. When the nightmares came, and they came every time I tried to close my eyes, I would find her looking at me through the dark. She would tap once against the deck, a heartbeat, a reminder that we still existed as more than thought. Sometimes, when the ship was at its quietest, I could hear whispering through the hull. It was like the murmur of a crowd in prayer, too faint to make out, too familiar to be strangers. I thought of the stories. We were told that the black ships carried Psykers to Terra so their gifts could strengthen the Astronomicon, that their deaths were sanctified. Yet the whispers didn't sound like faith, they sounded like pleading. On the 3rd rotation, a man began screaming in his sleep. The sound crawled through the hold, muffled by his gag but fierce enough to shudder the air. A sister appeared in silence. She placed a hand over his forehead, and he went still instantly, not fainted, not calmed, just gone quiet, like someone had closed a book mid-sentence. The others looked away. Seren didn't. Her gaze followed the sister until she disappeared beyond the bulkhead. Later, she tapped 3 words into the deck plate. She saved him. I answered with one, maybe. When the lights came back, the man's chains hung empty. His body was gone, but his smell remained ozone and burnt copper. A thin smear of residue gleamed where his skin had touched the metal. No one asked where he went. On the black ships, questions are another form of noise, and noise is punished. After that, I stopped trying to sleep. The hum began to sync with my heartbeat, until I couldn't tell which one belonged to me. Each pulse carried a taste static, smoke, and the faintest trace of voices layered deep beneath the metal. They weren't words yet, just syllables caught between prayer and warning. Once, during feeding cycle, I caught sight of one of the handlers, A man, not a sister, wearing the crimson of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. His face was grey, his eyes glassy, his voice steady as he recited the benediction of use. He placed nutrient rations at our feet, never meeting our eyes. When he turned, I saw the back of his skull, a small brass plate bolted into the bone, embossed with an aquila, the machine spirit's mark of obedience. Seren's gag slipped as she bent to pick up her ration. A fragment of whisper escaped her lips, not loud enough to be language, but the shape of a name. I caught it and held it in memory, turning it over silently. Vale. That night, I repeated it to myself until it stopped sounding human. On the 5th rotation, the air pressure changed. You could feel it in the ears, a heavy bloom, as if the void itself pressed closer to listen. The hum deepened, more organized now, like a chorus aligning itself after a long rest. Some of the Psykers began to shake. Others sat completely still, eyes rolled back, lips moving behind the gags. Then the lights flared gold. The sisters entered in formation, 6 of them, visors gleaming, their armor humming faintly with the echo of null fields. Behind them came the overseer, a tall, bone-thin man in layered robes of black and vermilion, his collar etched with sigils of binding. His voice filled the hold through vox amplification, smooth as oil. "By the grace of the Master of Mankind," he intoned, "you have been chosen to serve. Through your voices, the Imperium endures. Through your silence, it will never falter." He raised his hand, and we bowed without being told to. The hum in the walls harmonized with his cadence. For a moment, I thought he was singing too. When he left, the sisters sealed the doors, and the light faded again. I could still hear his voice repeating itself in the metal. "Through your silence, it will never falter." The ship seemed to agree. The hull groaned like something pleased. Seren leaned forward, her eyes catching the faint red lumen glow. I couldn't hear her voice, but I could read her lips. "We're not meant to come back." The hum climbed again, slow, steady, deeper than breathing. I wanted to pray. I wanted to remember the words my mother had taught me. But in that moment, every prayer I knew sounded like noise, and the ship had already taught me what it does to noise. When I finally closed my eyes, I saw the black ship not as a vessel, but as a lung drawing in air it would never release. And we were its breath. The hum became our day. When it rose, we woke. When it dimmed, we pretended to sleep. Somewhere beyond the hull, time moved as it always had. But inside the Veritas Solis, it had been dismantled hour by hour, thought by thought, until all that remained was rhythm. The sisters returned every few cycles, inspecting us with quiet precision. Their armor smelled of incense and sterilizing oils, and when they passed, the noise in our skulls flattened into nothing. I learned to cherish that nothing. The first breath that came after was always a shock, like surfacing from deep water. Seren's ribbon had come loose. It hung against her cheek, a single streak of color in a world that refused to remember color existed. I caught her eye once while the sisters walked past, and she gave me the smallest shake of her head, warning, not refusal. When they left, she tapped something on the deck with her knuckle, faint but deliberate. They listen even when they're not here. I waited until the hum rose again before I answered. Then we should too. That night, or what we decided was night, the ship shuddered. A violent lurch through the chains taut. Metal screamed somewhere in the distance, followed by a chorus of muffled cries. I thought for a moment we'd hit something, but no, this was deliberate. A test, a reminder. The overseer's voice bled through the vox again, distorted and cold. "The Emperor hears the pure. He hears through your fear. Let it become devotion." Seren mouthed the words along with him, not mockery, not obedience, something in between. She knew them already, as though the ship had whispered them into her dreams. Hours or days later, we were moved. Null collars resecured, gags replaced. The air outside the hold was colder, sharper, filled with the scent of solvent and metal shavings. We passed a row of cells where light spilled in from narrow viewports. I caught glimpses, faces slack with exhaustion, some pale as ghosts, others rigid in prayer, every one of them humming, soft and broken, like a machine on the edge of stalling. A sister guided us into a chamber lined with copper wiring. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of blue light crawling across etched sigils. This was not the hold. This was where they prepared us for service. At the center stood a dais ringed by 9 servitors, their flesh blackened by augmetics. Between them hung a lattice of polished metal threads, swaying in the recycled air. I could feel it, even before I saw it, the pull at the edge of my consciousness, the way it seemed to drink in thought. The hum in my chest tried to match its pitch and failed. The overseer appeared again, flanked by 2 sisters. "You will become the Emperor's voice," he said, hands raised like a priest blessing the dead. "Through unity, strength, through surrender, clarity, the throne hungers for song." One by one, they led us forward. Each Psyker stepped into the lattice, screamed once without sound, and went still. The servitors adjusted dials, noted readings, and dragged the body away. Another took its place. The rhythm was clean, merciful in its efficiency. When my turn came, I looked at Seren. She was still waiting, chain slack between us, her eyes fixed on mine. She shook her head once, not to refuse, but to promise. "I'll follow." The sister unclasped the chain, guiding me toward the lattice. My feet left streaks of grime across the polished floor. The air thickened. I could taste electricity, metal, and something faintly sweet. The overseer murmured a benediction. Voice 993 Beta, offering. A cold crown pressed against my temples. The machine hummed, finding the pitch of my heartbeat. My thoughts unraveled at their edges, bleeding into the current. For a moment, it was beautiful, a sound vast enough to touch every star. Then the pain came, clean and total. It wasn't burning, it was being rewritten. Images flashed like prayers reversed. My mother's face, the square, the ribbon in Seren's hair, the hymn of the Emperor's mercy, all dissolving into the same white noise. Beneath it all, the hum grew louder, steadier, transforming into something that wasn't quite song and wasn't quite silence. When it ended, I was on the floor. The servitors adjusted the dials. The overseer looked down at me with mild curiosity. "Strong resonance," he said. "He hears you clearly." They chained me back beside Seren. Her fingers brushed mine. She was trembling. I realized then that her hum had changed pitch. It matched mine exactly. We didn't speak again for a long time. The ship continued its hymn, and we became part of it. Later, when the lights dimmed and the overseer's voice receded, she leaned closer, lips barely moving. "If he hears us," she whispered through the gag, "why does he never answer?" The hum filled the pause. It was the only reply we ever got. The Veritas Solis no longer felt like a vessel. It was a lung. The corridors breathed with us drawing, in our voices, exhaling the thin taste of incense and cold iron. The hum that had begun as vibration in the hull was now inside our bones. I could not remember the last time I had heard true silence. Days bled into one another. Sometimes a lumen flickered to mark feeding. Sometimes the sisters opened the vents, so the recycled air stung our eyes and reminded us of light. The rest was waiting. We waited to be summoned, to be tested, to be rewritten again. Even thought was a kind of disobedience. I learned to think in whispers. Seren was beside me still, her ribbon gone now, her hair cropped short. Without it she looked less like a woman, and more like a prayer carved from ash. The marks from the lattice still ringed her temples, faint and metallic. When she moved her head, they caught the lumen glow and flashed gold for an instant, like she wore a saint's halo forged from pain. We were moved deeper into the ship. The hold narrowed, ceilings lowering, air thickening until every breath sounded wet. The walls sweated condensation that smelled faintly of burnt copper. I had begun to realize that everything aboard the Veritas Solis smelled of copper blood, and wiring shared the same taste. The new chamber was circular, its floor a grid of prayer-etched steel. Along the walls were pods, hundreds, maybe thousands each, containing a figure suspended in amber light. Some breathed, some didn't. The hum was deafening here, resonating through the ribs like a heartbeat that refused to die. This was the choir deck. I knew it without being told. The overseer appeared again, robes whispering over the grid. "This is your sanctuary," he said. "You will lend your voices to his eternal purpose." The Astronomicon must never dim. His tone was almost gentle, but the words weighed more than the chains ever had. He gestured to the pods. "These are your brothers and sisters in service. They dream the light that guides mankind. You will join them soon." A sister stepped forward carrying a thurible of burning oils. The smoke coiled around us, heavy with narcotics. My knees folded. Seren tried to keep her eyes open. The fumes made her sway. The overseer's outline blurred, and I heard him murmur something that might have been a blessing or a command. The hum grew louder still, reaching into thought, pulling memories loose like threads. For a moment, I was back in the hive square. The sunlight filtered through smog, my mother pressing the rosary into my hand. Then the vision warped. The rosary became chain links. My mother's voice merged with the overseer's, both saying the same phrase, "Sing loudly, my son." When I woke, we were in separate pods. The glass was cool against my forehead, and inside my skull a low vibration persisted, a remnant of the chant that had carried us here. I could not see Seren, only the faint blur of figures beyond the amber haze. The gag was gone, but the null collar remained, humming softly against my throat. Every breath I took made it vibrate, a quiet duet between flesh and restraint. The ship drifted. I could feel its course changes through my spine. Each turn pressed me deeper into the gel padding. Each burst of acceleration pulled the air from my lungs. Through the glass, I caught glimpses of the sisters passing between pods, their golden visors throwing thin lines of reflected light that crossed over our faces like benedictions. One paused near mine, head tilted. Though I could not see her eyes, I felt the pressure of her attention. My heartbeat slowed against its will. She touched the glass once, 2 fingers, light as a promise, and the hum dropped to silence. The absence hit like a blow. Thought roared back in, chaotic and unshielded. I saw Seren's face, the ribbon, the hive's square, the rosary, all at once. Then the sister withdrew her hand, and the silence closed again like water over a stone. After that, time ceased completely. We drifted through days made of whispers and dim, gold light. Some of the Psykers began to murmur through the walls. I could hear them faintly, distant as memories. They weren't speaking to each other, though it was prayer, or the echo of it, words worn down to sound. I found myself joining them, not to worship, but to stay human. The rhythm of the chant steadied my pulse. I could not stop. Once, through the murmur, I heard Seren's voice. Clear, low, almost calm. "He hears us, Kalen," she said, "but he doesn't listen." The sound cut out a second later as the null field flared, but it was enough. I knew then that she was still near, and that even the silence couldn't hold forever. The hum resumed its endless climb, higher, purer. The glass around me trembled like an instrument string drawn too tight. I pressed my palm to it and felt a vibration pulse back, not mechanical this time, but human. Someone else's heartbeat, syncing with mine through the barrier. We were becoming the same note. There were moments when I thought the Veritas Solis was dreaming. The hum would drift low, almost tender, as though the ship itself was breathing in unison with us. The walls expanded with each exhale, contracting again when the engines whispered. I started to believe that maybe it didn't move through the void at all. Maybe it slept there, and we were its pulse keeping it alive. Days or years passed like that. I knew neither. The only measure of time was when the sisters walked among the pods, bearing their thuribles of incense and machine oil. They never spoke, but sometimes one would linger long enough for you to feel the silence bend around her. The null field wrapped like cold cloth across thought, forcing everything within reach to kneel. I began to look forward to those visits. Silence was the only peace left. I spoke to Seren through the hum. Not with words, those were forbidden, but through the subtle alterations of breath and heartbeat, the vibrations our restraints allowed. If I slowed my breathing, she would match it. When I tapped the side of the pod with my nail, she would answer 3 beats later, a fragile connection in the machinery of obedience. Then, one rotation, the overseer's voice came again through the vox, carried by static that scratched like claws inside the mind. "Prepare for communion," he said. "The Emperor's light requires renewal." A servitor approached, its limbs jointed with bronze pistons, its mouth replaced by a speaker grill reciting binary prayer. Tubes fed from its chest into the base of each pod. A pale fluid began to flow, and I felt the sting of it in my veins, something cold and bright and absolute. My heartbeat faltered, then steadied at a rhythm not my own. The overseer continued, voice calm and reverent. "The faithful will harmonize, the unworthy will burn. Both shall be heard." The hum surged, a noise deeper than thunder, older than language, filled every nerve. The glass of my pod vibrated so hard it blurred the world beyond. I caught glimpses through the distortion, faces lit from within, mouths open in silent screams that merged into one perfect tone. I couldn't tell if I was screaming too. Light poured from the seams in the chamber walls. The air grew heavy, solid, pressing down on thought until all that remained was instinct, the desperate need to survive, even if survival meant surrender. For a heartbeat, the hum cracked. 1,000 voices broke through in panic, prayers splintering, names shouted and devoured by the resonance. Then, like a blade through fabric, a single voice rose above them all. It was Seren. I recognized her tone instantly, the one note I'd been listening for in the endless harmony. She wasn't screaming. She was singing, deliberate, measured, carrying a melody older than faith itself. The pitch cut through the chaos, steadying the others, folding them into her rhythm, until the chamber's resonance shifted again. The overseer spoke once more, but his words were lost in the sound. The servitors froze, mid-ritual. Even the sisters halted, turning their visors toward the source. The hum deepened until it was almost unbearable. The light dimmed, flickering through colors I couldn't name. I saw shadows moving within it, wings perhaps, or silhouettes of something vast and watching. Then silence, real silence. For the first time since the hive, since the square, since the world had gone holy with fear, I heard nothing. The lights steadied, the servitors rebooted with mechanical groans. The overseer's voice returned, distorted but calm. "The communion is complete. The Emperor is satisfied." The fluid withdrew from our veins. The hum resumed, softer now, like the echo of its own memory. I realized I was still alive. So was Seren. Her pod sat 3 rows away, glass fogged but intact. She turned her head slightly, enough that I saw her eyes. They were bright, too bright, and for a moment I thought I saw golden light moving within them, like a reflection of stars. When the sisters left, I tapped the side of the pod, the same pattern as before. 3 slow, 1 fast. She didn't answer. Hours later, the overseer came again, his robes whispering against the deck. One voice failed to integrate, he said to no one in particular. One voice sang outside the pattern. He paused near Seren's pod. A sister stepped forward, visor reflecting her motionless form. The overseer made the sign of the Aquila. "Purify the deviation." The pod flared with light, then dimmed. The hum never missed a beat. When the sisters moved away, I saw the glass had gone dark. Her body remained, perfectly still, eyes closed. But somewhere beneath the floor, I swore I could still hear her note. Softer now, buried under the rest, yet unmistakably hers. The overseer left without another word. I pressed my hand to the pod wall, letting the vibration crawl up my arm until it reached my chest. I mouthed the only prayer I still remembered. "Sing loudly, my son," and somewhere in the hum, Seren answered. After Seren's light faded, the Veritas Solis seemed to breathe differently. The hum had changed pitch, barely perceptible, but wrong in a way I could feel in the marrow. It no longer carried the soft, steady rhythm that had become the ship's heartbeat. Now it trembled, strained, as though something vast and heavy pressed against the hull from the outside. The overseer's sermons continued. He spoke less now, and his words came slower, as if weighed down by the thing he'd made. Sometimes the vox distorted mid-phrase, cutting his voice into fragments that finished themselves in the hum. I stopped trying to understand them. Meaning was a luxury we weren't permitted anymore. Days crawled by without color. The pods were never opened again. Nutrient lines and electrodes were our only connection to the world beyond the glass. Sleep came not from exhaustion but command chemical and absolute. Dreams were no longer private. They came with echoes, borrowed images from others, still alive somewhere deeper in the choir. Some were screams, others were flashes of light shaped like faces. Once, I dreamed of Seren's ribbon, drifting through void, burning but never consumed. When I woke from that one, the hum inside the chamber faltered for a heartbeat, as though it too had remembered. It was then that I began to hear her, not through ears those had become useless, but through the same resonance that bound us all. A note hidden beneath the others, a dissonance that refused to blend completely. It was soft, but steady, carrying a shape of defiance so pure it almost felt holy. Seren's final song. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that grief had built me a ghost to cling to. But others began to feel it too. The overseer's assistants whispered hurriedly as instruments glowed the wrong colors. The sisters walked the corridors more often, their visors turned toward the floor as if listening for something that was no longer supposed to exist. The hum rose and fell in erratic waves. When it peaked, faint lights shimmered inside the glass, shapes like wings, or flares of thought too intense for matter to hold. Some of the Psykers began to weep openly, tears floating into the recycled air like offerings. I tried to reach for Seren's presence within the sound, and for a heartbeat, the hum answered. My restraints thrummed, my pulse aligned with the ship's. I could feel her. "We're not gone yet," she said, not words, but the shape of them, etched into the rhythm itself. The pod lights flickered red. A null wave passed through the chamber, silencing every vibration at once. The sudden absence of sound was agony. Thoughts screamed where ears could not. The overseer's voice replaced the hum, harsher than ever. "Containment breach. The pattern will hold. The Emperor's will does not waver." He was wrong. The pattern was fraying. I could hear it, could see it hairline, cracks of golden light spreading across the metal floor beneath the pods, as if something beneath the ship was trying to surface. The servitors reactivated, pumping another round of narcotic slurry into our veins. Sleep crashed over us like floodwater. My thoughts scattered, trying to hold one last image before dissolving. The ribbon, the promise that someone still remembered. When I woke, the light was different, dimmer, older. The air felt thin, used up. Through the condensation on the pod glass, I saw movement shadows pacing between rows. The sisters were gone. Only the overseer remained, his robe unfastened, his face bare for the first time. His eyes were bloodshot, lips cracked from unspoken prayers. He looked more human than I had ever imagined. He approached my pod and placed a hand on the glass. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. The question was unnecessary. The hum had grown faint, hollow, like breath through broken lungs. "The song is failing," he said. "The Emperor's light cannot dim, not here, not now." He turned away, frantic, muttering litanies to himself as the servitors realigned circuits. The golden cracks beneath the deck widened, their glow pulsing in time with the failing hum. It wasn't the Astronomicon we were hearing anymore. It was something else, older, deeper. My restraints twitched, loosened. Whether by malfunction or mercy, I didn't know. I reached toward the glass, fingers brushing the surface. It was warm, too warm. The hum returned in a brief surge, shrieking through the ship like a heartbeat trying to restart. Within that pulse, I heard her voice again, clear and resolute. "Sing, Kalen." The restraints shattered. The pod cracked open. Liquid poured onto the floor, mixing with the light. The overseer turned just in time to see me fall to my knees amid the spreading glow. He began to shout another order, but the sound vanished, devoured by the returning hum. It wasn't the same note anymore. It was harmony. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of voices rising together. The lost Psykers, the silenced ones, the forgotten songs, Seren among them, leading. The Veritas Solis trembled, its lights flickering like dying stars. The overseer fell to his knees, his voice cracking into a sob that no one heard. For a single breath, the void outside turned gold. Every star shone brighter. The song reached beyond the hull, stretching out toward terror, toward eternity. And then, it was gone. The hum collapsed, leaving only the memory of its resonance in my bones. The glass around me cooled. I was alone again, but not empty. The silence didn't feel like loss this time. It felt like waiting. I do not know how long the silence lasted after the ship's song died. The Veritas Solis drifted without sound, a carcass adrift in an endless black sea. The servitors were still. The air recyclers wheezed now and then like a creature that had forgotten it needed to breathe. Every so often, a lumen flickered, somewhere far down the deck, but no footsteps followed. When I could move again, I tore the nutrient tubes from my arms and crawled from the shattered pod. My body felt borrowed, too heavy, every motion stiff with pain. The chamber reeked of ozone and incense burned long ago. Hundreds of pods still glowed faintly. Inside them, motionless figures floated like saints preserved in amber. Their faces were peaceful, or maybe just empty. I staggered between the rows, bare feet sliding through the film of fluid on the floor. I half expected the sisters to appear, to raise their silent hands and end what the lattice had spared. But they were gone, every one of them. The golden visors that had haunted my nights were strewn on the floor like offerings that had been refused. The overseer lay near the dais, slumped against a console. His robes were torn, his eyes open but unfocused. A faint hum still came from the speaker embedded in his collar, residual vox interference looping his last orders. I knelt beside him, drawn not by pity but curiosity. His hands were clasped around a small relic, a sliver of metal engraved with the double-headed Aquila. The wings had been rubbed smooth by devotion. For a long time, I stared at it. Faith had been my mother's last gift. Now it felt like a weapon disguised as prayer. I placed the relic back in his hands and whispered what I hoped sounded like a benediction. May he keep your silence. The chamber lights pulsed weakly, once, then dimmed to red. Somewhere deep within the ship, the main reactor stirred. The hum returned, not as music, but as breath. A ragged, uneven rhythm, as though the Veritas Solis had awakened unsure if it should have. I looked toward the lattice at the room's center. The golden wires still glimmered faintly, webbed with dried blood and sanctified oil. The throne at its heart remained upright, waiting. A body sat there, smaller than the rest, head bowed. Seren. I approached slowly, afraid to disturb. What little peace might still cling to her. Her eyes were closed, her face streaked with burn marks from the neural clamps. She looked asleep. The ribbon was gone, but I could still imagine where it had been, the ghost of its color haunting the air around her. Seren, I said, my voice raw. You stopped the song. The ship answered instead, a low vibration that thrummed through the deck. I pressed a hand to her shoulder. Her skin was cold, but not lifeless. Beneath it, faintly, I felt that same pulse, weak, steady, familiar. Sing, Kaelin. The voice didn't come from her lips. It came from everywhere, from the lattice, the walls, the ship itself. It was softer now, a whisper that brushed the edges of thought. I can't, I murmured. I don't remember how. The hum rose, gentler this time, coaxing rather than commanding. You already are. I stepped back. The lattice began to glow, the copper threads heating until they burned like sunrise. Sparks fell into the puddles on the floor, hissing like tiny hymns. The pods around the chamber flickered to life one by one, their occupants twitching, breathing, reawakening. The dead were remembering themselves. The Veritas Solis groaned, metal stretching under strain. The walls shivered with motion. Consoles sputtered alive, data streams cascading across shattered screens. The ship was turning slowly, aimlessly, its thrusters igniting without command. I stumbled toward the dais and grabbed a rail for balance. The overseer's body slid across the deck, colliding with the lattice base. The relic in his hand clattered away, spinning to rest at my feet. The Aquila's wings caught the light and gleamed like fire. Seren's head lifted. Her eyes opened, empty and radiant all at once. The light inside them wasn't gold anymore. It was white, blinding, pure. When she spoke again, her voice carried the vibration of 1,000 others. The Emperor hears through us, he always has. The words resonated, through the hull, carried down every corridor, into every quiet corner of the ship. For a moment, I could see the truth of it. The Astronomican's beam threading through space, fed by voices like ours, by minds stripped of everything but faith and pain. The Emperor didn't listen. He spoke through what we had become. Seren's gaze fixed on me. "You will help me keep the light." I shook my head. "You're dead, Seren." She smiled faintly. "So are you." The hum peaked. The lights exploded in a ring of brilliance. I fell back, blinded, the sound tearing through flesh and thought alike. When my vision cleared, she was gone. Only the lattice remained, glowing faintly like cooling metal. I lay there for what felt like hours, the vibration fading from my bones. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. There was a strange calmness, the kind that comes only after all possible fear has burned away. The Veritas Solis steadied itself, systems rebooted, the lights dimmed to steady gold. In the hum, I thought I heard her again, distant but patient. "The light endures, Kaelin. Sing for it." And so, without knowing why, I did. A low note, trembling, uncertain. The sound traveled through the air, through the deck, into the walls, joining the hum. It was small, almost nothing. But the ship heard it. And it answered. The ship sang back to me. Not loudly, never loudly, but in that slow, rising way that makes you think it's breathing. I could feel it through the soles of my feet, through the copper rail under my hand, through the bones in my jaw. It vibrated in the same rhythm as my pulse, a pulse that no longer felt like mine. The light of the lattice dimmed until only the faintest threads of gold remained, running through the floor like veins. The pods had gone dark again, their inhabitants silent. But I knew they were not dead. They were listening, every one of them waiting for the next note, the next signal, the next command disguised as devotion. I found the Overseer's relic lying where it had fallen. When I touched it, a whisper rose from the metal. Not words, just breath. The kind of sound you make when you want to speak but realize there's nothing left to say. The aquila was cold, its edges sharp enough to draw blood. I pressed it to my palm and felt the warmth spread slowly through my hand. The console beside the dais flickered. Old data, fractured hymns, vox logs looping endlessly. I saw recordings of other choir chambers, other ships, each voice a thread in a tapestry of faith. I scrolled through them, page after page, until I saw something familiar. Seren's face. She was smiling, eyes half-lidded, light flickering across her features as she spoke to someone unseen. "Through our voices," she said softly, "he navigates the dark. We are his map." Then static. The image warped, melted into light. I stared at the screen until it burned white, my reflection distorted in the glow. The ship shuddered. Somewhere above, a series of relays clicked in sequence. The Veritas Solis was aligning itself with something distant, unseen. The air grew dense again, the same pressure I remembered before the communion began. It felt like standing inside a prayer about to be answered. I turned toward the lattice. "Is this what he wanted?" I whispered. The hum replied, not through sound, but through memory. I saw flashes, hundreds of Psykers across millennia, each one strapped to a throne, each voice melting into the same eternal vibration. The Astronomican burning at the center of it all, a star made of agony and worship. And above it, the faint outline of a figure impossibly large, impossibly distant, bathed in golden light that looked too heavy for any god to bear. Seren's voice threaded through the vision. "He doesn't want Kaelin, he requires." The floor quaked. Sparks rained down from the ceiling as the ship's internal conduits overloaded. A column of light erupted from the lattice, stabbing through the deck plating and vanishing into the void above. The Veritas Solis was awake again, more awake than it should have been. I stumbled backward, shielding my eyes. The hum became deafening, an orchestra of pain and devotion. I felt it trying to pull me under again, to fuse my voice with the others, to turn me back into a note within the Emperor's endless hymn. I resisted, not out of rebellion, but out of something simpler need. I wanted to remember. My mother's rosary hung from my wrist, miraculously unbroken through everything. The beads were slick with blood and fluid, but when I closed my hand around them, the hum faltered. Just for a moment. It wasn't defiance that silenced the song. It was recognition. I realized then what Seren had meant. The Emperor's choir was not built from devotion. It was built from memory, millions of human recollections pressed together until they became indistinguishable. The song was memory itself, singing of what it used to be, human. "Seren," I said aloud, "if you can hear me, tell me what happens if we stop." The hum trembled, uncertain. For a moment, the air felt lighter. Then her voice came again, faint but smiling through the noise. "Then the stars go dark." Outside the viewport, I saw them flicker, tiny points of gold dimming one by one, the Astronomican's reach faltering as the Veritas Solis struggled to maintain its harmony. The ship screamed in a language only metal could speak. I dropped to my knees, the vibration clawing through my ribs. "You can't leave," the hum said, not as her, not as me, but as something that had once been both. "You are already part of the map." The light surged white, brighter than any star. The lattice reactivated, its copper veins glowing until the metal itself began to melt. Streams of liquid gold ran down the dais and pooled around my knees. My reflection shimmered on the surface, face half lit, eyes burning with light that wasn't mine. And then I understood. The Emperor didn't need my faith, he needed my memory. Every name, every love, every fear I'd ever had would become another coordinate in his light. I thought of Seren. I thought of the hive, of the rosary, of the word sing. I opened my mouth. The sound that left me was not a scream, nor a prayer. It was the same note that had haunted me since the day I was taken pure, sharp, absolute. The lattice calmed, the light steadied, the stars outside brightened again. Somewhere deep in the void, the Emperor's beacon sang anew, and in that moment, I knew I'd never hear silence again. When the light faded, I was still standing, though the deck beneath me glowed red with heat. The lattice had gone dark once more, its veins cooling into dull copper. Around me, the air smelled of burnt oil, incense, and blood, the trinity of service. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like another kind of noise, one the body wasn't built to bear. The Veritas Solis drifted quietly through space. Somewhere deep in its hull, the reactors pulsed again, steadier this time, as if satisfied. I could hear their rhythm echoing in my bones. It wasn't the old hum. It was slower, gentler, almost thoughtful, like the ship itself was trying to remember the song it had just sung. I walked among the pods once more. Most were empty now, the glass shattered or burnt away. Others held only outlines, human shapes left behind in ash. And yet I felt them all around me, woven into the air. Their presence wasn't gone. It had simply become part of the soundless atmosphere, the quiet gravity that held the ship together. When I reached Seren's throne, I saw her body had vanished. Only her restraints remained, bent and scorched, and the faintest smear of gold where her blood had mixed with molten metal. The lattice wires hummed when I touched them faintly, but there, as though remembering the hands that once held them, "Seren," I whispered, "are you still here?" The air stirred. Not wind. The Veritas Solis had no such mercy but pressure, thought pressing against thought. A whisper threaded through it, soft as breath on the back of my neck. "Always. You gave him what he wanted." I turned, though I knew she wasn't behind me. Her voice came from everywhere, folded into the hum I now carried in my own chest. "He doesn't want," I said, echoing her earlier words. "He requires. That's faith, Kalen. Faith is hunger that learns to sing." I laughed once, not from joy, but from the absurdity of it. The sound startled me. It didn't sound human anymore. The timbre had changed, metallic, resonant, a vibration too precise for breath. My reflection on the pod glass confirmed what I already felt. Faint golden filaments traced across my temples, the same scars the lattice had left on Seren. They pulsed in rhythm with the ship's new heartbeat. The Veritas Solis had marked me as its own. I sank to my knees and pressed my palms to the floor. The metal was warm and slick with condensation. When I listened closely, I could hear countless voices whispering beneath it, some pleading, some praying, others simply murmuring words without meaning. They were the ship's history, the residue of every offering it had ever carried. "Keep the light," Seren's voice urged again. "Don't let it fade." "I'm not him," I said. "I'm not the Emperor. I'm not even sure I remember what I was. That's why you can keep it. Those who remember can't sing." The logic twisted itself into my mind until it made a terrible kind of sense. The Emperor's choir wasn't made of saints, it was built from those who had learned to forget themselves completely. I picked up the Overseer's relic where it had fallen, still faintly warm. The Aquila's twin heads reflected the dim glow from the chamber lights. For the first time, I saw how wrong it was, not two eagles facing outward, but one devouring, the other, wings tangled like prey caught in its own snare. "Through unity, silence," I whispered. "Through silence, light." The deck shuddered in agreement. The Veritas Solis was turning again, its thrusters igniting in slow, reverent bursts. A destination entered itself into the navigation cogitators without command. Terra. Of course, the ship was going home. I should have been relieved, but the thought chilled me. I had seen what waited at the end of this voyage, the golden spires, the endless vaults, the great machine that fed on 1,000,000,000 voices. I knew that when the Veritas Solis docked, they would find me still alive, still humming, and they would call it a miracle. They would add me to the lattice and burn my name into another hymn, but perhaps that was the only ending the Imperium allowed. I pressed the Aquila against my palm again, feeling its edges bite. The metal cut deep enough to draw blood. My blood fell onto the deck and shimmered not red, but faintly gold. The sight made me dizzy with a mixture of awe and horror. "It's begun," Seren murmured. "You're part of the song now. You can never go back." The ship hummed softly in agreement. It didn't sound cruel. It sounded content, as if it had finally found the pitch it had been searching for. I sat there for a long time, listening to the void outside the hull, waiting to see if any echo would return. None came. The stars were distant and cold. The only warmth left was the steady rhythm in my chest, the same as the ship's, the Emperor's rhythm, or perhaps just the rhythm of what the Emperor had built. "I'll keep the light," I said quietly, "even if I have to burn with it." The hum deepened, embracing the words like an amen. And somewhere far above, faint but certain, I heard the Astronomicon sing again, the sound of 1,000,000,000 souls burning in harmony. The Veritas Solis has been moving for what feels like an eternity, and yet the stars never change. They remain where? They are distant, patient, watching as though waiting to see if I will finally accept the silence I helped create. I have stopped marking time. There is only the hum now, steady as a prayer that no longer expects an answer. I live inside the choir chamber, though I am no longer chained. The pods are tombs now, every one of them sealed and inert, their occupants return to that nameless unity that the Imperium calls faith. The air tastes of iron and sanctity, heavy with the perfume of the dead. Sometimes, when the ship drifts close to a solar flare, I can feel the heat through the hull, a phantom warmth that reminds me of sunlight on the hive's upper plazas. The memory hurts, but I cling to it anyway. Pain is proof of something human. I have come to understand what Seren meant when she told me we were his map. The black ships don't merely transport Psykers, they navigate by them. Every voice, every mind that has ever burned in the Astronomicon becomes another coordinate, another fixed point in an ocean of darkness. And now the Veritas Solis carries its own fragment of that light through me. The Overseer's relic lies beside me, the Aquila corroded from the acid in my blood. I speak to it sometimes, though I'm not sure if I'm praying or confessing. We were meant to serve, I tell it. But no one told us what service costs when it never ends. The hum answers by vibrating through the floor, rising into my teeth, filling the hollow behind my eyes. It doesn't hurt anymore. It feels like breathing. Occasionally, I think I see Seren in the glow of the lattice, not her body, but her presence, a shimmer of light caught between pulses. She speaks less now, but when she does, it's in fragments that arrive like dreams. They will come soon, Kaelin. They will take you to Terra. I know, I tell her. And when they do, I'll keep singing. You already are. I have started to understand that the ship itself has begun to build as dawn, echo her voice. The line between memory and machinery has blurred. The Veritas Solis remembers everything that has ever been said within it. Every confession, every scream, every prayer, all of it folded into its hull like veins in metal. Sometimes, when I run my hand along the wall, it hums back with the tone of my own voice from another day. One rotation ago or 1,000, I heard something new. A faint tapping from deep within the subdecks, rhythmic and uncertain. Not mechanical, not random. Communication. I followed it through the corridors, past the empty cells and sealed bulkheads, until I reached the observation bay. The viewport glass was cracked, frost creeping inward from the edges. Outside, I saw them small ships, distant, flying in disciplined formation. Imperial vessels, black and gold, their prows marked with the sigils of the Astra Telepathica. They were coming for the Veritas Solis. I returned to the choir chamber and waited. The hum had grown quiet, subdued, as if the ship itself were listening. Then, faint through the comm net, a voice, Veritas Solis, respond. This is High Ship Mercurian. Identify your Psyker complement and state your condition. I hesitated. It had been so long since I'd heard another human voice that wasn't inside my head. I wanted to answer, to tell them everything about Seren, about the song, about what the Emperor really asks of those who serve him unseen, but the ship decided before I could. The comm crackled, filling the air with static. The Veritas Solis replied in my voice, all units active, choir stable, communion ongoing. The transmission ended. I stared at the console, the words still echoing from the Vox. I hadn't spoken. The ship had used me. My throat ached anyway, as though I had. It wasn't lying either. The choir was stable. It was me. Hours later, the Mercurian began to close distance. I could see the glint of its hull through the viewport, the golden sigils reflecting, the light of some distant star. I realized then that they didn't know what they were approaching. To them, the Veritas Solis was simply another returning black ship, another choir vessel on the long road to Terra. They would dock. They would find one survivor. They would hear the hum and call it holy. Seren's voice returned to me, softer than ever. You can stop it, Kalen. You can let it end. How? I asked the silence. By dying, by remembering. Her words sank deep, more painful than any command. I closed my eyes and felt the hum through the floor again, alive, endless, eternal. The Emperor's will made manifest in sound, and for the first time, I hated it. The Mercurian's signal repeated through the Vox, demanding response. The Veritas Solis hummed louder, resisting. I stood between them, human and machine, both waiting to see which would answer first. The Mercurian's signal came again, clear, insistent, full of authority. Veritas Solis, respond. Immediately. You are entering. Approach pattern. Theta 7. Confirm. Navigation control. The words hung in the stagnant air, too clean for this dead ship. The Veritas Solis did not reply this time. The hum stayed low, pulsing like a heartbeat held in a clenched fist. I could feel the ship's hesitation. It was listening, the way a beast listens when deciding whether to strike or flee. The light strips along the chamber walls dimmed to a faint amber glow. The lattice gave a single, low vibration, one note, sustained just long enough for me to understand it was waiting for me to speak. Don't make me lie for you again, I said aloud. The lattice flickered. The hum replied, a soft, questioning tone that sounded almost like why. Because they'll come aboard, I continued. They'll see what you've become, what we've become, and they'll call it holy. Silence. Then the faint creak of metal, the deep shift of mass through the hull. The Veritas Solis was changing course. I felt it in my knees, in the small of my spine, the pull of momentum, subtle but certain. It wasn't turning toward the Mercurian. It was moving away. Running won't save you, I said. They'll follow. You can't hide from your own kind. The hum swelled, filling the chamber like breath. I could almost hear words in it this time, not voices but echoes of thought. fragments from the countless Psykers who had once sung within its walls. We endure, we serve, we burn. I pressed my hand to the nearest pod. The glass was cold, yet I could feel the faint pulse within the residue of lives still trapped somewhere in the machine's memory. "You don't have to keep singing," I whispered. "The light will live without you." The hum faltered. For the first time since Seren's death, it truly hesitated. Then the Mercurian spoke again, closer now. "Veritas Solis, power down engines and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will be met with sanction." The ship trembled. The lights flickered blue, then white. I could sense the fear in it, yes, fear. The black ship was alive, and it knew what sanction meant. The Imperium did not forgive malfunction, and it certainly did not forgive disobedience. "Let them come," I said softly. "Let them see." Seren's voice stirred in the hum, faint, uncertain. "If they see, they'll destroy you too. Maybe that's what's supposed to happen. You said you'd keep the light." "I will," I said. "But not like this." The chamber's walls contracted, groaning. The lattice flared once, gold and blinding, before dimming again. A panel on the central console snapped open, spilling dust and melted circuit gel. Inside was a control relay, old, half corroded, pulsing faintly with residual energy. I recognized it, the ship's communion core. My breath caught. It was the heart of the Veritas Solis, the link between its choir and the Astronomicon, the channel through which our voices reached Terra. Destroying it would silence the ship forever. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the relay. The hum deepened, becoming pleading, desperate. I could feel the memories pressing against me, Seren's laughter, the touch of her fingers against mine, the thousands who had sung before us, each one believing they were chosen. "You deserve rest," I told them. "All of you." The Mercurian's approach beacon flashed through the viewport. They were almost here. I placed my hand on the relay. The heat seared my skin instantly. Pain blossomed up my arm, sharp and pure, the kind of pain that cuts through memory and forces the present to exist. I pushed harder. Sparks burst from the seams. The hum screamed, not in sound but in pressure, shaking the chamber, making the air taste of metal and tears. Kalen Seren's voice, raw and pleading. "You can't." "I can," I said. "You taught me how." The relay cracked. A beam of light split the chamber in two. The hum shattered into fragments, every note breaking apart, spilling over itself in a chaotic, impossible harmony. The Veritas Solis buckled, the floor heaving upward. I was thrown against the dais, ribs snapping on impact. Through the pain I heard the ship cry out, not a sound but a memory collapsing. The voices that had filled its walls for centuries rushed past me, fleeing into the void, leaving only the faintest afterglow in the air. Then, silence, the real kind. The light in the chamber faded to black. The only sound was my heartbeat, slow and weak, echoing in the dark like the last drum of a dying god. I slumped against the wreckage, smoke curling from the broken relay. The hum was gone, the ship was dead. "You kept the light," Seren whispered one final time, faint and warm. I smiled, even as blood filled my mouth. "No," I breathed. I set it free. Outside the viewport, the stars flickered brighter. The Mercurian searchlights swept across the hull. They would find me soon. They would call it heresy, but for the first time, I knew peace. The chamber burns dimly now. The air tastes of static and iron, and each breath drags smoke into my lungs like incense from a dying altar. The Veritas Solis no longer hums. It breathes in shallow gasps, spasms of residual energy flickering through the lattice as the systems struggle to decide if they should die or serve. I sit against the dais, my vision split by pain and fading light. Blood pools beneath me, spreading in thin rivers that shimmer faintly gold when the emergency lamps flare. I can hear the distant echoes of docking clamps striking the hull. The Mercurian has arrived. I thought I'd feel fear, but instead, there's only exhaustion, a calm that feels unearned. The silence I fought for fills the room, heavy, sacred, wrong. I realize it isn't silence at all, it's the absence of command. The first moment in centuries that this ship has not been told what to do. Through the viewport, I can see the light of the Mercurian search beams slicing through the void. They move across the hull of the Veritas Solis like hands searching for a pulse. They will find none. The comvox crackles weakly. Veritas Solis, this is Captain Rian of the Mercurian. You are adrift. Prepare for boarding. The voice is steady, but beneath it I hear something else. The echo of the choir, faint and distant, still embedded in the communication relay. They will hear it soon enough. They will think it's a miracle. I push myself to my feet, though my legs barely hold. The pain is sharp but clean, like the world reminding me I'm still something solid. The Aquila relic lies nearby, half melted, half divine. I pick it up, turn it in my hand. Its wings have fused together, no longer twin, just one shape, molten and incomplete. Kaelin. Seren's voice, soft and close now, as if she's standing beside me. I ended it, I whisper. I silenced the choir. You didn't end it. You changed the note. The deck trembles once, low and brief. I realize she's right. The Veritas Solis isn't dead, it's resting. The silence is not death, but the intake of breath before another verse. The Emperor's light never truly stops. It only waits for someone willing to burn again. They'll take you, Kaelin, Seren says. They'll make you sing again. I know. Then let them hear what they've made. Her voice fades. The comm flickers. Static floods the chamber as external contact locks engage. The hull groans. I can hear the hiss of decompression, the distant thump of boots. The Mercurian's boarding party is here. I limp toward the lattice. The copper threads still pulse faintly, fragile as candlelight. I touch one, and it warms beneath my fingers, alive with stored memory. I close my eyes and draw in a breath that tastes of ozone and blood. When I exhale, the hum returns soft, mournful, human. My voice joins it, unbidden. A single note at first, trembling, uncertain, then stronger, carrying through the chamber, through the decks, through the broken corridors of the Veritas Solis. The sound echoes into the void. It's not the Emperor's hymn this time, it's mine. By the time the boarding team breaches the chamber, the air is filled with light. They stop in the doorway, weapons raised but unmoving. I can see their faces behind their visors, confusion, awe, fear. They're hearing it too, the hum vibrating in their armor, running through their teeth, sinking into their hearts. One of them lowers his weapon and murmurs, "He's alive." No, I'm not anymore. I am what the ship made of me, a memory turned into sound. The lattice flares gold again, brighter than before. The chamber fills with radiance. I can't see the soldiers now. Their outlines dissolve into the light. The hum rises, deepens, becomes something larger than voice. It's the sound of every condemned soul that ever burned in the name of the Emperor, gathered here in final harmony. The Mercurian's vox feeds the sound across the fleet. I can hear their astonished prayers echoing back, the same words repeated across 1,000 channels. The Emperor's light shines again. Maybe it does. Maybe it never stopped. The pain fades. The warmth grows. I think I can see Seren's face, smiling through the glare, her eyes filled with gold. "You kept the light," she says again. I want to answer her, but my throat no longer obeys. The sound has gone beyond me. I fall to my knees as the lattice's light reaches its peak, spreading through the chamber like dawn breaking over the void. The Aquila in my hand liquefies, running between my fingers like molten faith. The last thing I feel is the hum not in my ears, but in my heart, where the metal has already begun to take root. And then there is peace. I silenced the ship, but the song remembered me. When the light receded, I was not where my body had fallen. I was in the places light remembers. The spaces between plates, the seam where two rivets meet, the tiny hollows beneath prayer-etched steel where breath has no business lingering. The Veritas Solis lay still, yet I felt motion everywhere, heat bleeding from conduits, pressure lazy in the air ducts, the slow settling of a vessel that had shouted and was now ashamed of its volume. Boots crossed the threshold of the choir chamber. I knew the weight of them without needing eyes. The boarding team moved with reverence disguised as protocol. Safety's off, formation tight, hearts beating the same practiced rhythm. Their helmets cast cones of lumen that tried to turn holy what was merely quiet. Someone's gauntlet brushed the lattice and flinched back, as if from a reliquary too warm to be honest. "Record everything," a voice ordered the captain, calm in the way that believes the world will keep its shape if sentences are smooth. "Mark remains for sanctification. Secure the survivor." I looked for the man they meant and found only memory. I could still taste blood on a tongue that wasn't there, could still feel the aquila melting between fingers that now belonged to the ship as stains belong to cloth. They lifted him, me, and the echo of that motion traveled through the deck into the bulkheads, down the spine of the vessel. The ship carried the movement like a rumor, and I rode it, learning the corridors by how they accepted weight. They spoke my name as if it were their discovery. "Sergeant Kalen Holt," the captain read from a slate, each syllable testing whether the ship would permit them. "Astra Telepathica designation pending. Choir asset. Alive. Alive." The word rang and did not strike anything solid. The Medicae's auspex clicked through its rituals. I felt the reading as a cool pressure gather and release around what used to be ribs. "Pulse faint, stable," the Medicae reported. "Neural activity anomalous. He's humming." They all heard it. Then the low vibration at the edge of hearing that lies because it sounds like mercy. No one spoke for a moment. I listened to their silence and heard their thinking, not as words but as shifts of stance, shallow breaths, the weight of doctrine settling on shoulders made for armor. Faith is a uniform that fits even when you are bleeding. They carried me past the pods. Some of the glass bowed inward as if trying to inhale us back. Some was webbed with hairline fractures that trapped emergency lumen in patterns like frost. A trooper paused to see his reflection multiply across a curve of darkened glass and found, for a heartbeat, 1,000 faces looking back, none of them his. He shut off his lamp and walked faster. In the corridor, incense clung where the air system had failed to forget it. I traveled with them through the floorbones, through the cable troughs, through the old inscriptions where oil and thumb had made the aquila thin as a hope rubbed smooth. The ship was a library of touches, and I had become its librarian. When the captain gave an order, I felt the sentence ring down the rails. When the Medicae coughed, the sound nested in a vent and stayed there like a small, guilty bird. At the airlock, they halted. "We take him now," the captain said. "The ecclesiarchy will attend the vessel later. This ship will be declared sanctified." Sanctified, another word that sounds like cleaning when it means covering. The lock cycled, the Mercurian's breath mixing with ours. They crossed, and the Veritas Solis felt the loss like muscle taking an absence personally. I stayed. Where else could I go? A ship keeps what is spoken into it. A confession doesn't leave the booth, it becomes the booth. Seren's presence reached me not as voice but as drift, a slow current the way coolant finds the one path that still remembers warmth. "You see it now," she said without saying it. "A choir is a place before it is a song." In the quiet that followed, I learned the Veritas Solis the way a tongue learns a missing tooth. The hangar where candles had blackened a saint's face until the soot drew a better one. The shrine where a sister had once pressed her helmet to the grill, and the grill had kept the shape of her prayer. The little pantry where a deck serf had hidden a child's token, a lead bird with one wing, and the token had stained the shelf with the patience of metals. A ship is a memory palace that forgot it was built to move. On the Mercurian, they laid me on a slab kissed by unguents, sutured what could be sutured, measured what could be translated into numbers. "Stabilized," the Medicae said. "Mind still anomalous." The captain nodded, relief and calculation polite to each other. A confessor arrived, his voice a comb for tangled souls. He touched oil to my brow and said the line that opens all doors. "If you can hear me, speak." I answered where he could not chart it, in the hull behind him, in the humming of cores, the deck under his boots, in the small tremor of the bulkhead screws that keep their propriety even under strain. The Mercurian listened without knowing how to name listening. Its cogitators stuttered, and then repeated a phrase they had never been taught, through remembrance, light. The confessor shivered, as if a draught had found his bones. "He is receptive," he declared, which is what you say when a mirror shows you your face and you decide it's a window. They argued over destinations they already knew. Terra, Telepathica sanction. The words had weight. They set themselves down like furniture. He will strengthen the choir, someone said, trying not to be proud of that sentence. A good sentence sits with its shame. They sealed the Veritas Solis behind rites and warnings and turned away. I felt the docking clamps release the small sadness of metal unlearning pressure. The black ship spooled its silence into itself obediently, a scroll tied off and shelved. No movement now, just the long patience of objects that have done their shouting. On the Mercurian, the captain stood beside my slab in the soft hour between duty and sleep, and watched the way my chest rose without deciding to. "You will be honored," he told a man who was mostly sound. "Your service will reach farther than any soldier's." He believed it because belief is a raft that floats even when the sea refuses an audience. I wanted to tell him something tender and unhelpful. That service is not a road. It is a room with doors painted on the wall. That the Emperor's light is a city seen from below beautiful because you will never live there. That every song we sing to keep the dark at bay arrives in the dark's handwriting. Instead, the Mercurian's deck hummed once, barely, like a throat deciding against a cough. The captain frowned at the slab, then at the wall, as if one of us owed him the courtesy of speech. He left. Men who keep orders also keep hours. When the ship slept, I explored the quiet corners, the auxiliary vox well where old prayers pooled like rainwater, the chapel's cracked icon where a saint's hand had been worn down to a gesture that could be blessing or warning. In the engine room, a tech priest had inked binaric on the casing of a pump. "I promised to return you better than I found you." The pump had answered by surviving, which is a clever way for a machine to keep a promise for a man. Seren drifted with me, present in the way starlight is present. Not heat, not touch, but a permission. "When they carry you to Terra," she let me know, "remember what you broke. They will ask you to love it again." "I will sing," I said, "but I will remember. Then the song will be different." The Mercurian altered course. Somewhere in a distant black, the Astronomicon pulsed like a city's heartbeat measured across lifetimes. I felt the beat through a hull that did not belong to me, and through me it found the one thing it had asked for in the first place, a voice it could live inside. I slept if this drift is sleep and dreamed of the hive's upper plazas, of a ribbon that had learned to be fire, of numbers that behaved. In the dream, my mother's rosary was a chain, and the chain was a lattice, and the lattice was a road, and the road did not end. It arrived. When I woke, nothing had changed. When I woke, everything had. They kept me in a sanctum that smelled of oil and beeswax, the kind of clean that means important people pass this way. Candles guttered in cages so the drip would be disciplined. A brass aquila hung above the door, its eyes set with red stones that reflected every lumen twice, as if the room had learned to watch itself. The slab beneath me hummed a hospital's quiet prayer. Hold, hold, hold. I learned the Mercurian the way tide learns coastline. Its corridors were narrower than the Veritas Solis, its metal younger, less haunted, but already eager to practice remembering. The engines spoke in orderly phrases. The cogitators clicked like rosaries done by habit. Here, service had windows. Crewmen passed in pairs, uniforms pressed, boots polished to argue their footsteps into order. They glanced at my door the way faithful men glance at graves politely, with the exact measure of fear that proves good manners. The confessor returned daily. His hands were careful, his eyes tired in a way that makes mercy a profession. He read me fragments of the creed, pausing after each line as if waiting for answers the book had not provided. "Through our voices," he murmured once, "the Emperor is glorified." The deck beneath him twitched, and the lumen above us dipped a shade, as if the ship had considered clearing its throat. He looked up, then at me. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," I said, though my mouth did not move. The sound went out through the bulkhead instead. A coin dropped into the poor box of the ship. He shivered, blessed the room, and left with the relief of a man whose work now belonged to a holier bureaucracy. Not all the listeners wore collars. A rating no older than I had been when numbers calmed me lingered after delivering unguents. He set the tray down too softly, as if careful not to wake a sleeping saint. His gaze flicked to the slab, then to the floor, then to the slab again. "Sir," he whispered to the metal, "not to me. My mother says the Emperor hears every word. Is that true?" The Mercurian's frame answered with a single, kind vibration that makes truths survivable. "He hears every use of them," I let the steel say. The boy smiled in relief or in superstition, both are cousins, and pressed his palm to the bulkhead like a pledge. The print warmed and stayed a moment after he left, a small fidelity the ship was proud to display. We crossed void that had learned patience. Through the viewing chapel's slit window, the Astronomicon pulsed like a city burning slowly and refusing apology. The crew knelt at hours struck by bells. Their kneecaps polished the decking at the places devotion requires. I rode the vibrations down coil to the engine room and found a tech priest teaching a novice to hear machine spirit mood through the pitch of steam. "All sanctity is maintenance," he said, and the pump agreed by not failing. It is astonishing what survives when given a reason that fits the hand. Seren's presence thinned, not from distance but from purpose. What remained of her preferred the quiet corners, the storage alcove where bolts slept in sorted trays, the chapel rail warmed by fingers that leaned their weight into hope, the confessor's book where a pressed sprig of incense flower had left its brown ghost like a gentle stain. "They will make a place for you in the choir again," she let me know, a kindness wholly at ease with its cruelty. "You will fit better now." "Do I still remember?" I asked the hull. The question crawled through conduit and brace, sounding like a wrench set down carefully so as not to startle faith. "Yes." The word came back from 100 places at once, "and that is why you will hurt well." We took confession through the vox of a world we passed, a mining moon whose overseer begged for clearer beacons, a pilgrim barge whose master had taught his crew to chant the coordinates into their dreams, a patrol ship that asked no questions because the answers would have to be believed in public. Each voice rattled the Mercurian in its own shape, and each time the hull gave back a note that was mine, not loud, not proud, enough. Night watch aboard ship is the hour when orders grow contemplative. I wandered then, in the manner of weather, touching only what remembered being touched. A sister of silence waited in the shrine where the Mercurian kept its reliquary a surprise, her presence like a vowel in a language that had sworn off them. She stood unhelmed, scalp bare, eyes steady as winter. We regarded one another in the way of stones. She lifted 2 fingers, the sign that says stillness. The metal around us softened its hum out of respect. She traced another sign in the air. "Listen." It was not instruction, it was consent. The Mercurian carried it as far as the anchor bolts would take it. Silence stood between us like a table we had both agreed to set. After she left, I found that the air held the exact shape of where she had been, a cut-out absence that fit any word I tried to place in it. The ship admired that shape and kept it. The day terror announced itself through the view slit. No one needed the bell. The crew crowded the chapel, ranks blurred by the human need to see home even if they could not afford it. The planet was ablaze under armor, light like edict, atmosphere banded with traffic lines of sanctified smoke. Orbital platforms glittered like a net designed to catch only certainty. Some men cried. Some men grinned with their training. The confessor's voice wore its best clothing. "Give thanks," he said. The deck murmured in a resonance. I recognized from every square where crowds are urged to be one thing. My note joined it, and for the first time, I felt the harmony push back. Terror's gravity insists, so does its liturgy. The great city in the sky prefers voices without edges. The Mercurian shivered not in fear, in etiquette, then aligned itself with the lanes that were more law than route. "Telepathica has acknowledged us," the captain announced, satisfaction tidy in his tone. "We are privileged to deliver an asset." Asset. The word set itself down with the confidence of a coin that never need be counted. The crew answered with a cheer that knew its place. I watched light crawl down the walls in carefully measured increments, and the ship pretended not to flinch. In the sanctum, 2 acolytes in black and vermilion rolled my slab toward the docking collar. Their palms left oiled eclipses on the rail. The confessor walked beside them, repeating lines he would not remember later because duty borrows. voice the way a sea borrows boats. The door at the end of the corridor bore sigils that meant clean in 100 dialects of obedience. I recognized them from every threshold that ever ate a person and called it service. Seren brushed the edge of my awareness no more than the warmth a cup leaves after it is lifted. When the door closes, she said, "Sing the first honest thing you have left. What if honesty is small? Then it will fit everywhere." We entered the collar. Gaskets sighed. Terra's breath replaced the Mercurian's. I felt the difference like a hand on my chest, deciding how fast I should remember. The slab crossed the line where one ship ends and another begins, and the note of the world changed, the key center altered, the overtones learned new manners. The deck adjusted its posture to match the weight of history pressing down from above. On the far side, robed figures waited with instruments that measure what men prefer to call grace. Their tools gleamed, their faces did not. A bell tolled somewhere not far and exactly far enough. "You are welcome," one said, and meant useful. "You are seen," another said, and meant catalogued. I let the steel under their feet carry a breath. Not a word, not a lesson, just proof that air could still be persuaded into kindness. A few heads lifted, uncertain. The rest of the faces did their practiced work. The slab rolled on. Terra's light, even through corridors, finds a way to sound like judgment. I gathered what remained of my memory and set it in my chest like a rosary that asked nothing and therefore could not be stolen. They would put me in a lattice. They would teach my voice to stand at attention forever. I would sing anyway. They took me below the spires into Terra's endless labyrinth of stone and sanctity, where the air itself was scripture. Every corridor was lined with saints who had forgotten their faces, their names carved over with new titles: the remembered, the redeemed, the useful. I was carried on a slab through halls that glowed with filtered gold, the kind that burns too slowly to notice until you realize it's been changing your skin. Every breath I drew there was borrowed from someone praying. The air hummed faintly with hymns leaking through pipes that had long ago learned to sing on their own. The Adeptus Telepathica handled me like an artifact, murmuring designations in ritual cadence. Psyker designation confirmed. Choir intake sequence initiated. The words were not for me, they were for the walls, so they could remember. I saw others waiting in the intake vault, hundreds of figures bound in prayer chains, their eyes covered with silk to keep faith from escaping. They swayed as if in breeze, but the air was still. Each breath came out as steam. Each heartbeat added a tremor to the great hum, echoing through the vault's foundations. This was the sound of Terra's obedience. They placed me in a seat, carved from old bronze, wires snaking, like roots into the spine of the world. The servitors worked without thought, their gestures gentle, almost affectionate. One adjusted a cable near my throat, and for a moment I imagined it whispering, "Welcome home." The confessor from the Mercurian watched, hands clasped, lips trembling around the litanies he'd been repeating since we entered orbit. "He is calm," he said to the overseer beside him. "That's good." The calm ones last longer. They anointed my head with sacred oil that smelled of dust and fire. The overseer leaned in, his voice soft as thread. "Through you the Emperor will see. Through you, the Astronomicon will burn bright again." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him it already burned brighter than it should, that it did not need more voices to keep it alive. But the words came out as a hum, low, even, resonant. The sound filled the chamber and made the candles flicker toward it. The overseer smiled, mistaking it for prayer. "He's ready," he said. "He remembers his purpose. He was wrong. I remembered everything else." The lattice descended a crown of wires, gold and copper, polished to a cruel shine. They fixed it to the scars already burned into my temples. The pain was brief, almost nostalgic. Then the world opened again. I saw the galaxy through the choir's eyes, endless threads of light stretching into black, each one a soul tethered to the Emperor's beacon. The song surrounded me, thick as gravity, a harmony too vast for mercy. Millions of voices rising and falling, and within them, small truths whispered between the notes, forgotten names, fragments of laughter, a child's promise, the memory of sunlight on unarmored skin. The Imperium built its light from things that once loved. Seren was there, not as sound, not as light, but as stillness between both. "We are what endures," she said, the words vibrating through memory, not space. "I know," I answered. "I just wish I didn't." She didn't reply, but I felt her understanding sharp and kind at once. The choir absorbed me then, gently this time. My hum merged with theirs, a single thread woven into the pattern that would never stop moving. Far above, I felt the Mercurian depart. Its engines were already part of the new song. Its captain would say his prayers and believe the miracle. The ecclesiarchy would record my designation among the emperor's chosen. My name would be reduced to numbers again, but the hum beneath their prayers would carry what they couldn't catalogue, that once, for a heartbeat, the light was silent. Time dissolved. It no longer moved, it breathed. The Astronomicon burned, steady and immense. Every flicker of its light was a life ending, another beginning. I felt each spark like a heartbeat, each silence like forgiveness. The Emperor's presence loomed far beyond thought, distant, unbearable, indifferent. Yet within his indifference something small survived, something human. I think that's why he keeps us, so he can remember what he took. The technicians left. The chamber dimmed. Only the choir's eternal pulse remained. In the faint light that reached my face, I thought of my mother's voice, of the hive's upper plazas, of Seren's ribbon and her last smile. The ship, the void, the pain, all of it part of the same hymn now. And somewhere, deep beneath that endless song, a quieter note persisted mine, small enough to hide but strong enough to stay. Maybe that's what faith really is. Not the noise we make for gods, but the whisper that refuses to vanish when everything else does. I became his light, and still I remember the dark.